Welcome to this deep dive.
Yeah.
Today we're going to take you through a truly fascinating legal document.
Okay.
It's the 2024 judgment in the case of Uganda v Thomas Kwoyelo.
Right.
Buckle up, because this case
Yeah.
delves into some of the darkest chapters of Ugandan history
Right.
and sheds light on the complexities of international criminal law.
It really does.
We're going to break down this complex case into digestible insights.
Okay.
We're going to explore the LRA's brutal tactics, examine the charges against Kwoyelo, and hear the harrowing testimonies of survivors.
You'll be exploring crimes against humanity and war crimes committed during that brutal conflict with the Lord's Resistance Army.
Right, the LRA.
Yeah, the LRA.
Before we get into the legal specifics, can you paint a picture of what was happening in Uganda during this time? Help us understand the context of this conflict.
Imagine a country held hostage by fear for decades.
Wow.
That was Uganda, under the LRA, led by Justice Kobany.
Right.
Mass killings, abductions,
Oh, my God.
children forced to become soldiers, and widespread violence against civilians.
It's hard to even imagine.
That was a horrific period.
And this case focuses on Thomas Kwoyelo,
Yes.
one of the LRA commanders, right?
That's right.
What makes his case particularly complex?
Well, Kwoyelo's case is a tangled web because the LRA's reign of terror wasn't confined to Uganda.
Right.
Their operations spilled across borders into Sudan and the Democratic Republic of Congo.
So multiple countries.
Yes, and this raises all sorts of questions about international jurisdiction
I see.
and cooperation in prosecuting these kinds of crimes.
Yeah.
It gets very tricky very quickly.
So we're not just talking about a local conflict here.
No.
This has implications for international law and justice systems around the world, doesn't it?
Absolutely, and that's what makes this case so fascinating.
Yeah.
It's a microcosm of the challenges we face in holding perpetrators of atrocities accountable in a globalized world.
So how did Kwoyelo end up in court?
Okay, so
It can't have been straightforward.
you're right, it wasn't.
Yeah.
Kwoyelo was captured in 2009 in the Democratic Republic of Congo and brought back to Uganda.
Oh.
He applied for amnesty under Uganda's Amnesty Act,
Right.
which was designed to encourage LRA fighters to surrender.
Ah, so there's a potential conflict here.
Yes.
They're trying to bring someone to justice for these horrific crimes, but also have a law that encourages them to come out of hiding.
Yeah,
What a dilemma.
precisely. It's a classic dilemma.
Yeah.
Balancing accountability for atrocities with the need for peace and reconciliation.
What did the court decide about the amnesty?
The Supreme Court ultimately ruled that the Amnesty Act
Okay.
didn't provide a blanket pardon, especially not for international crimes like the ones that Kwoyelo was accused of.
Right.
This is a crucial point because it set a precedent
Okay.
that even in the pursuit of peace, certain acts are so heinous they demand justice.
That makes sense. So that paved the way for his trial.
Yeah.
Now, I have to admit, I'm a little fuzzy on the distinction between crimes against humanity and war crimes.
Okay.
Can you break that down for us?
Of course, crimes against humanity are like an organized attack on civilians.
Okay.
Widespread or systematic. Think of it as a state or organization deliberately targeting its own people.
I see.
War crimes, on the other hand,
Yeah.
are grave breaches of the Geneva Conventions.
Okay.
These are rules that govern warfare and protect civilians and prisoners of war.
So things like torture or the deliberate killing of civilians during wartime would be considered war crimes.
Exactly. But it also includes things like using child soldiers
Right.
or attacking hospitals and other protected sites.
I see. So in this case, Kwoyelo was charged with both types of crimes.
That's right.
What can you tell us about the chilling specifics of the LRA's brutality?
Get ready, because the court heard about 8 chilling incidents that reveal the true horror of what happened.
Wow, 8.
The court heard testimony from survivors who described being abducted,
It's just awful.
tortured, forced to carry looted goods, and witnessing horrific acts of violence.
My gosh.
They were beaten, tortured, and forced to participate in killings.
It must have been incredibly difficult for them to relive those experiences in court.
I can't imagine.
Did their testimonies provide insights into Kwoyelo's actions specifically?
Absolutely. Their testimonies are heartbreaking,
Yeah.
but also essential in understanding the LRA's brutality.
Right.
Some describe Kwoyelo's direct involvement in killings,
Really?
abductions, and even ordering executions.
Wow.
It's truly disturbing.
Can you give us some specific examples? I know it's
Yeah.
tough to hear, but I think it helps to grasp the reality of what happened.
For example, there was a case where abductees, many of whom were children, were forced to beat other captives to death.
Oh my goodness.
Witnesses described systematic sexual violence against young girls.
That's just horrific.
One survivor recounted the LRA attacking the Pagak IDP camp, burning hundreds of huts, looting property,
Oh, wow.
and killing dozens of civilians.
Just terror.
Survivors were forced to lie down and then beaten on the head with sticks.
It's hard to imagine the level of cruelty involved.
It's truly harrowing.
This level of brutality is almost beyond comprehension.
Yes.
Did the judgment go into detail about the specific charges against Kwoyelo?
Yes, meticulously.
Okay.
He faced charges of murder, enslavement,
Wow.
rape, torture, imprisonment, pillaging, aggravated robbery, and more.
So a whole range.
The judgment methodically analyzes the evidence for each charge, drawing on witness testimonies, medical reports, and even Kwoyelo's own statements.
Yeah, they really went through it all.
They didn't just lump everything together, they went through each accusation systematically.
This is where we see international law applied in a real-world setting, right?
Absolutely.
What are the takeaways here for our listener?
The court had to establish the existence of an armed conflict,
Okay.
the civilian status of the victims, and Kwoyelo's specific role in these crimes.
So, like, connecting all the dots.
It's like a puzzle connecting all these pieces to build a case.
Right.
This painstaking approach emphasizes the importance of thoroughness and due diligence in applying international law.
That makes sense.
It's not just about reaching a verdict. It's about ensuring a fair and just process.
I remember one of the arguments used by the defense was military necessity.
Right.
They claimed some actions, like destroying property, were justified as part of the conflict.
Yeah.
But it sounds like the court wasn't buying it.
You're absolutely right. The court rejected that argument.
Okay.
They found no legitimate military purpose for things like the widespread looting,
Right.
the burning of homes, and the attacks on civilians.
Yeah.
They drew a clear line. Even in war, there are limits.
Yeah.
Civilian lives and property must be protected.
This is a crucial point for our listeners to understand.
Yes.
The court's rejection of the military necessity argument reinforces the idea that even in the chaos of war, there are rules that must be upheld.
Absolutely.
Now, can you explain joint criminal enterprise
Okay.
and why it's important in Kwoyelo's case?
Essentially, joint criminal enterprise means that individuals can be held responsible for crimes committed by a group
Right.
if they shared a common purpose
Right.
and participated in some way, even if they didn't directly commit the act themselves.
So if you're part of a group that plans and carries out a massacre,
Right.
you can be held accountable even if you didn't personally kill anyone.
Exactly.
That's a powerful concept.
And it's especially crucial in holding accountable leaders like Kwoyelo.
Right.
He may not have been directly involved in every act of violence, but held a position of authority and influence within the LRA.
It's all about accountability.
Yes.
Recognizing that even those who give orders or are part of a criminal enterprise bear responsibility for the atrocities committed.
That's right.
What was the court's final decision?
After a long and detailed analysis,
Okay.
the court found Kwoyelo guilty of a significant number of charges, including crimes against humanity and war crimes.
What does this verdict mean for Uganda, especially considering the context of the Amnesty Act?
This case is a landmark decision for Uganda.
Okay.
It demonstrates a commitment to holding perpetrators of atrocities accountable. Even in the face of complex legal challenges and the legacy of a brutal conflict,
Absolutely.
it shows that even while seeking peace, there is a line that cannot be crossed when it comes to justice.
This is a great point to wrap up part one.
Okay.
We've explored the context of the conflict in Uganda, delved into the complexities of crimes against humanity and war crimes, and seen how the court meticulously laid out the evidence against Kwoyelo.
Right.
What stands out to you from what we've covered so far?
The sheer scale of the LRA's brutality is deeply disturbing.
Yeah.
But what's fascinating is how the court managed to sift through the chaos and apply international law to hold an individual accountable for his role in these atrocities.
Yeah, it's amazing.
It is.
Welcome back to our deep dive into the case of Uganda v. Thomas Kwoyelo. Last time we explored the context of the LRA's horrific campaign and got a glimpse into the court's methodical process in examining the evidence.
We also delved into the complexities of crimes against humanity and war crimes, setting the stage for a deeper exploration of the legal nuances.
Right, of this landmark trial.
Yeah.
Today, let's untangle some of the legal threads that make this case so fascinating.
Yeah.
One concept that caught my attention was extraterritorial jurisdiction.
Right.
Can you explain what that means and why it's relevant here?
Imagine a crime so horrific it transcends borders.
Okay.
That's where extraterritorial jurisdiction comes in.
All right.
It refers to a court's authority to try crimes that occurred outside of its own territory.
So in this case, the Ugandan court was trying Kwoyelo for crimes that happened in Sudan and the DRC.
Think of it this way.
Okay.
If a group of pirates attacks a ship in international waters,
Right.
they can be tried in any country that captures them, regardless of where the attack took place.
That makes sense. But what's the justification for trying someone in a country where the crime didn't actually occur?
There are a couple of key principles at play here.
Okay.
One is universal jurisdiction. This applies to crimes so heinous, so universally condemned, like genocide or crimes against humanity,
Right.
that any country has a right to prosecute them.
So it's like saying these crimes are an affront to all of humanity, not just the country where they happened.
It's the legal equivalent of saying, this is so wrong, we all have a stake in seeing justice done.
What's the other principle?
It's called the protective principle.
Okay.
And it allows a country to exercise jurisdiction over crimes that threaten its own security or the well-being of its citizens, even if those crimes took place abroad.
So if a group was planning a terrorist attack against Uganda from a neighboring country,
Right.
Uganda could potentially prosecute them, even though the actual attack didn't happen on Ugandan soil.
That's the general idea. It's about protecting a nation's core interests.
So in Kwoyelo's case, both of these principles were relevant because of the nature of the crimes and the LRA's cross-border operations.
You nailed it. The crimes he was accused of fall under universal jurisdiction.
Okay.
And given the LRA's reach beyond Uganda's borders,
Right.
there's a strong argument for protective jurisdiction as well.
So they were on solid legal ground in trying him for crimes committed outside Uganda.
The court concluded exactly that.
Wow.
But they also emphasized that there are limits to extraterritorial jurisdiction.
Okay.
It can't be used arbitrarily.
Right.
There has to be a clear connection to the prosecuting country's interests.
I see.
Imagine if a country tried to prosecute someone for a minor offense that happened decades ago on the other side of the world.
Right.
That wouldn't fly.
Right. There needs to be a substantial link.
Yes.
Now, we know Kwoyelo was captured in the DRC.
Right.
How did he end up back in Uganda? Was it legal for the Ugandan army to apprehend him in another country?
That's another layer of complexity in this case.
Okay.
He was captured by the Ugandan army, the UPDF, who were operating in the DRC at the time.
Okay.
Think of it like this. Sometimes countries cooperate and allow foreign militaries to operate within their borders for specific purposes.
So the DRC essentially gave them the green light, at least implicitly.
The court concluded that the DRC didn't object to the UPDF's presence or actions.
Gotcha.
It's also crucial to note that the judgment differentiates this from extraordinary rendition,
Okay.
essentially kidnapping someone from one country to another illegally, which would be a clear violation of international law.
They were careful to make that distinction because it's about respecting international norms and ensuring due process.
Yes.
It's like saying there's a right way and a wrong way to cooperate across borders when it comes to law enforcement.
Exactly. The judgment emphasizes transparency and adherence to legal principles.
Now let's turn our attention to the indictment itself.
Okay.
The judgment mentions that the distinction between crimes against humanity and war crimes wasn't always clear-cut.
Yes.
Did this create problems for the prosecution's case?
It certainly added a layer of complexity.
Okay.
Sometimes the charges seem to overlap,
Right.
which could potentially create confusion and blur the lines between these distinct categories of crimes.
And this isn't just a technicality, right? This distinction actually matters when it comes to proving a case and determining appropriate penalties.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Imagine you're trying to assemble a piece of furniture,
Okay.
but the instructions are unclear.
Right.
It's going to make the process much more difficult, right?
Yeah.
Similarly, the charges in an indictment need to be precise and clearly defined to ensure a fair trial.
So the judgment is sort of pointing out that the indictment could have been more carefully crafted.
Yes.
Even though they ultimately work with what they have.
Right.
What's the takeaway for our listener here?
It's like the court is saying, we understand the law, and we're going to apply it correctly, even if the initial paperwork wasn't perfect.
I see.
This reinforces the importance of precision and clarity in legal proceedings, especially when dealing with international crimes.
It's reassuring to know they're not just letting things slide.
Exactly.
Now, this case also highlights how Ugandan law intersects with international law, right?
Yeah.
How did the court navigate that complex terrain?
It's like weaving two different threads together to create a tapestry of justice.
Okay.
Uganda has its own laws against murder,
Right.
rape, kidnapping, and so on.
Of course.
But this case also involved international crimes governed by treaties and customary international law.
So they had to figure out how to apply both sets of laws in a way that was consistent and fair.
Right.
Can you give us an example of how they reconciled these different legal systems?
Let's look at the crime of pillage.
Okay.
Uganda's penal code doesn't have a specific crime of pillage,
Right.
but the Geneva Conventions do.
So they had to rely on international law for that specific charge.
Right.
But they might have looked at Ugandan law for guidance on related offenses like robbery and arson.
It's like finding the closest match in their own legal system to ensure they're not operating in a vacuum.
That's a good way to put it.
This kind of hybrid approach demonstrates a willingness to adapt domestic law to address international crimes.
It's like building a bridge between two different legal systems.
Yep.
Now, to apply certain international crimes, the court had to establish the existence of an armed conflict.
Right.
This seems obvious.
Yeah.
But why was it necessary to go through that process?
You can't have a war crime without a war.
Right.
So
Yeah.
even though it seems self-evident in this case,
Right.
they have to legally demonstrate that an armed conflict existed between the Ugandan government and the LRA.
I see.
It's not about taking things for granted. It's about carefully building a case on solid legal ground.
It's like laying the foundation for a house.
Yeah.
You need to make sure it's strong and stable before you start building the wall.
Exactly.
Now, before we move on, I want to revisit one of the most controversial aspects of this case.
Okay.
The amnesty debate.
Right.
It raises the age-old question of justice versus peace, a dilemma that many societies grapple with.
It's a tough one.
Remind us about Uganda's Amnesty Act and the tension it created in this case.
Uganda's Amnesty Act was a well-intentioned effort to bring an end to the conflict through peaceful means. It was designed to encourage LRA fighters to surrender and reintegrate into society.
Right.
Think of it as extending an olive branch in the hope of ending the violence.
It seems like it was quite successful in demobilizing large numbers of combatants.
It was.
But the dilemma arose when it came to high-ranking figures like Kwoyelo,
Yes.
who were accused of the most serious crimes.
Right.
It's understandable that people felt they shouldn't get a free pass.
Yeah.
Especially the victims.
Exactly. There was a strong sense that justice for the victims was essential.
Of course.
Ignoring the atrocities committed would be like saying their suffering didn't matter.
Yeah.
How can you rebuild a society on a foundation of unaddressed trauma and injustice?
And it seems like the judgment really grapples with this tension.
It does.
It recognizes the Amnesty Act's role in promoting peace, but also makes it clear that amnesty cannot be a shield for perpetrators of international crimes.
Right.
It's like drawing a line in the sand.
It's a delicate balancing act. The court concluded that amnesty was appropriate for rank-and-file fighters who may have been coerced or forced into participating in the LRA's activities.
Right.
But for those who orchestrated the atrocities, those who held positions of power and authority, there had to be accountability.
That makes sense. But I imagine this decision wasn't without controversy.
Of course not.
Some might argue that any amnesty, even for lower-level offenders, is a betrayal of the victims.
Right.
Others might prioritize peace above all else, even if it means some individuals escape punishment.
You've hit on a core dilemma in transitional justice.
Yeah.
There are no easy answers, and every society has to find its own path.
Right.
This is a debate that continues to this day, not just in Uganda, but in many countries, grappling with the aftermath of conflict.
Exactly.
How do you reconcile the desire for peace with the demand for justice?
There's no one-size-fits-all solution.
No.
It's about finding a way to address the past in a way that allows a society to move forward without forgetting the lessons learned. Now, before we wrap up this part of our deep dive, did other countries or international bodies have a say in this amnesty debate?
While the judgment doesn't mention specific interventions from other countries,
Okay.
it does refer to Uganda's obligations under international law.
Right.
Remember, Uganda is a party to various treaties, including the Rome Statute of the International Criminal Court,
Right.
which prohibits amnesties for genocide crimes against humanity and war crimes.
So they had to navigate those international commitments as well.
Yes, they did.
What's the key takeaway here for our listeners?
This case demonstrates that navigating the complexities of international law isn't about isolating yourself.
Okay.
It's about finding a way to uphold both your domestic legal framework and your international commitments.
Mm-hmm.
It's about being a responsible member of the global community while also addressing your own unique circumstances.
That's a great point to wrap up this part of our deep dive.
Okay.
We've uncovered some of the legal intricacies of the case, including the concept of extraterritorial jurisdiction and the balancing act between Ugandan law and international law.
Yeah.
And we've revisited the amnesty debate, a topic that continues to spark discussion and soul-searching.
We've also seen how the court's meticulous approach, even when addressing issues like the clarity of the indictment, underscores their commitment to fairness and due process.
Absolutely. Welcome back to the final part of our deep dive into Uganda v. Thomas Kwoyelo. We've journeyed through the horrifying realities of the LRA's atrocities.
It's been a long journey.
Untangled the complexities of international law and grappled with the ethical dilemmas of amnesty in the face of unspeakable crimes.
We've covered a lot of ground.
Today, let's shift our focus outward.
Okay.
What does this case, and all its intricacies and moral weight, tell us about the bigger picture of international justice?
For me, this case is a beacon of hope.
Okay.
A testament to the progress that's been made in holding perpetrators of atrocities accountable.
Interesting.
The fact that a Ugandan court was willing and able to take on a case of this magnitude, involving crimes against humanity and war crimes, speaks volumes.
It's like a ripple effect, isn't it?
Yeah.
International law isn't just something that happens in distant tribunals.
Right.
It's being woven into the fabric of national justice systems.
Exactly. For a long time, international criminal justice was seen as something remote.
Yeah.
Something that happened far away at The Hague.
Right.
But this case brings it home quite literally.
It does.
It demonstrates that national courts can be powerful engines of accountability.
And it sends a powerful message to other countries facing similar challenges.
It does.
It's like saying, you don't have to wait for an international tribunal. You can take ownership of justice within your own borders.
Precisely. It helps to solidify a global norm of accountability.
Yeah.
It's no longer acceptable to turn a blind eye to atrocities,
Right.
even if they occur in another country.
The world is watching.
Exactly. The world is watching, and the expectation is that these crimes will be addressed no matter where they happen.
It's like a global web of justice is slowly being woven, connecting us all in the pursuit of accountability.
Yes.
But this case is about more than just punishment, isn't it?
That's right.
It's also about acknowledging the suffering of the victims,
Yes.
those whose lives were shattered by the LRA's brutality.
You're absolutely right. The judgment doesn't shy away from detailing the horrific experiences of those who were abducted, tortured, and forced to witness unspeakable violence.
It's hard to even fathom.
It gives voice to those who were silenced by fear and trauma.
Right.
It allows their stories to be heard, their pain to be acknowledged.
In that acknowledgement, that recognition of their suffering
Yes.
is a vital part of justice, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely. It's about restoring dignity to those who were dehumanized by these crimes.
Right.
It's about recognizing their resilience and their strength in coming forward to tell their stories.
Even after all this time,
Even years later.
this case also emphasizes the lasting impact of these experiences.
It
It highlights the psychological trauma that victims may carry for years, even decades.
Yeah.
This is a dimension of justice that's often overlooked, isn't it?
You're right. It's often forgotten in the pursuit of legal accountability.
Yeah.
Healing from these kinds of wounds takes time and resources.
Of course.
It requires a commitment to providing support and care for survivors long after the trials are over.
It's about recognizing that justice isn't just about punishing the guilty.
Right.
It's also about helping the victims rebuild their lives and find a path toward healing.
Absolutely.
Now, we often hear about the limitations of international criminal justice.
Yes.
It's slow,
Mm-hmm.
it's expensive, and it's often seen as ineffective.
Yeah, that's a common perception.
Does this case offer a different perspective?
It's true that international criminal justice faces many challenges.
Right.
And there have been setbacks along the way.
Yeah, for sure.
But this case, I believe, offers a counter-narrative,
Okay.
a testament to the fact that progress is possible. It reminds us that these systems, while imperfect,
Right.
are capable of delivering a measure of justice.
It's like saying, don't give up on the pursuit of justice, even when it seems slow or difficult.
Yeah,
The effort is worth it, not just for the victims, but for the future.
exactly. This case took years to come to trial,
I know, it's amazing they persisted.
but the persistence of those involved is truly inspiring.
It is.
It shows that justice, though it may be delayed,
Right.
can ultimately prevail.
Wow.
And that persistence sends a powerful message to perpetrators.
What's that?
You may be able to hide for a while, but eventually accountability will catch up to you.
It's also a testament to the courage of the survivors who came forward to testify,
Absolutely.
knowing that they would have to relive their traumatic experiences.
It's incredibly brave.
Their willingness to share their stories, to face their abusers in court, is incredibly powerful.
Their bravery is what gives this judgment its weight, its moral force.
Yeah.
It transforms a legal document into a human story. A story of suffering resilience and the pursuit of justice.
And that story, as we've seen throughout this deep dive, resonates far beyond the borders of Uganda.
It does.
It speaks to universal values.
Yeah.
The idea that some apps are so egregious they demand a global response. It speaks to the idea that we are all interconnected.
Yes.
And that injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere.
You've captured it beautifully.
Thanks.
This case forces us to confront the dark side of humanity.
It does.
But it also reminds us of our capacity for compassion, our unwavering pursuit of justice, and our shared responsibility to create a world where atrocities like those committed by the LRA are never repeated.
As we conclude this deep dive into Uganda v Thomas Kwoyelo,
Okay.
I'm left with a sense of hope tempered by the sobering recognition of the work that still lies ahead.
Yeah,
This case has given us much to ponder.
it has.
The complexities of international criminal law, the delicate balance between peace and justice, and the enduring power of the human spirit in the face of unimaginable suffering.
It's been a privilege to explore these issues with you and our listeners.
Likewise.
I encourage everyone to seek out the full judgment
Yeah.
if you're interested in delving deeper into this remarkable case.
And until next time, keep diving deep into the issues that matter, the stories that shape our world, and the pursuit of a more just and compassionate future.